Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to the Insider Insight Show. I am honored to have back with me someone who I consider a friend. He might not see that in the reverse, but and someone who's an incredible patriot, who's had an incredible life story. For those of you not familiar with Patrick Byrne, he's truly a Renaissance man in every sense of the word. So many people first became introduced to Patrick when he became and founded and became the CEO of Overstock.com. But then he, if you will, took a significantly different path than most CEOs, in that he also became known for a campaign against illegal naked short selling that was occurring on Wall Street. He went after Wall Street. He went after their throat. And Patrick, along with security regulators, revealed that illegal naked short selling was occurring, that it was obviously a violation of securities law, but it was distorting prices of stocks. It was affecting every person in the public domain. Well, if that wasn't enough, enter 2020. And Patrick assembled a IT forensic team extraordinaire because Patrick had determined that there were some issues with elections. This is prior to November of 2020. And started looking at elections in the past, and then in real time was dissecting what occurred on November 3rd of 2020. Got a lot of heat for that. Got targeted. Demonized. But nonetheless, the information Patrick brought forward, no one can refute. No one can deny the facts, the data, the science that Patrick brought forward. But and Patrick actually wrote a great book at the time called Deep Rigged. I encourage you to get it. But he didn't stop there. Patrick continued on his efforts in benefiting the public, and now he's produced and developed a docuseries based on his life and his interactions with swamp creatures and the swamp, The Enemy Within. It's my incredible pleasure to introduce Pat Byrne. Pat, welcome back to the Operation Freedom Show and platform.
Dr. Dave Janda, it's an honor to be on again with you. And I remember you were, when I first stepped out into out of the mainstream media, so to speak, and got into this world, you were one of those first people who interviewed me back in November 2020, I believe. Mm-hmm. And December 2020. So you had, I'd give you about a 92%. You had almost everything right. But it was General Flynn who made this movie. I showed up and acted in the movie, but General Flynn decided it was kind of interesting. Can I tell you the story?
Absolutely. The Enemy Within. The Enemy Within.
A fascinating story. I wanted you to continue that story you were telling me.
Okay, we will.
Go ahead.
Well, so I have been in touch with folks in the transition team and then the beachhead team that went in when President Trump has now reassumed power. And they said, Dave, with your ability in communication, what do you suggest? How do we handle this? I go, 2 tracks. One track is never forget. Now people say, well, that's looking in the rearview mirror. No, if we don't rectify what happened in the past, we're gonna give a pass to the very criminals that are gonna slither back and do it again, only potentially worse. And the second track is onward and upward, moving the ball down the field. But in moving the ball down the field, we also have to never forget. And I want to get back into that in a little later, Pat, because actually, The Enemy Within docuseries actually is on that never forget, but because we never forget, we can move forward much quicker and much more, I think, forcefully.
I would go, well, Dave, that's well articulated. I might go a little bit stronger than that. I'd say that the price for there being no bloodshed after this or no jail terms mm-hmm. is if we're going to do a truth and reconciliation process, the price for that is it's the end of the progressive movement. This is a communist movement. Social justice warriors have their grand schemes on how they want to redesign the world. And to them, the Constitution is just this set of handcuffs that keep us from being able to reach and do what really needs to be done in this world. They clearly have no respect for it. Anything they've said to they're just speaking through their hat when they say otherwise. Law professors, law schools, major legal corporations, all who've sworn an oath to the Constitution, actually wear that very, very lightly when push comes to shove. It's horrible. It's horrible.
It is. It is. So let's talk about the enemy within, because if we don't address the enemy within, Pat, no matter what we try onward and upward, it's going to be undermined. Let's talk about the enemy within. Because very few people, you're one of the very few people, General Flynn, you are two of the very few people that are willing to dissect the enemy within.
Well, that's what the movie does. The movie shows my experience, and it reveals that I have had kind of a strange relationship with Uncle Sam for many decades. Not a spy. I'm not a spook. It's been more like an intellectual relationship. I've been very honored, and I never thought that I would describe it bring it public. I assumed it would maybe 50 years after I was gone, it would come out or something. But in the course of that contact, I bumped my head against the deep state and started bumping it in 2010. And in 2015, 2016, I got used for some bad. I was in the middle of the Clinton investigation, and I was in the middle of the Russian investigation, and I saw what was being done as a soft coup. I understood that I was being misused in a soft coup. So I know the chains of command and who did what from the inside. It's not a theory for me. That's what's so funny. So what happened was the day after the Byrne report was delivered, General Flynn noticed something very funny when they started the January 6th commission. They opened it. The hardest I've ever seen him laugh was the day after this. They opened it with Cheney.
Liz Cheney.
Liz Cheney giving a speech about how horrible this was and this and that. And on the evening of December 18th, 2020, the Oval Office was penetrated by General Michael Flynn, Sidney Powell, and somebody else.
Yeah, somebody else.
And somebody else.
That guy.
And he came in the next day. I saw him the next day, and he doubled over laughing.
Somebody else.
And he said, "What is this?" And I said, "Sir, it's because my story is kryptonite. Kryptonite. Let's sit down and talk it through carefully." Yeah. And I did that, and about 3 or 4 months later, they delivered the Byrne report. And the Byrne report came out, and it was a cover-up. Byrne report is basically the second volume, speaking metaphorically, second volume of a 2-volume report, and they buried volume 1. It all started at least by July 2015, and I think as early as February 2015, there's some evidence of. And I was in the middle of it all, so I can attest to this from personal experience. That this was being cooked up by Brennan and Comey on the Republicans on purpose by, say, February of 2015. That there was going to be a Russia scandal involving these Republicans. It's all being cooked up, and Maria Butina was in the center of it. So anyway, the movie tells this whole story from this natural relationship that was mostly scholarly and something that was very behind the scenes, and I always felt very honored to have it. Once in a while I would get a request to show up somewhere in a month, and you're going to speak on this subject, and I go, and there's a bunch of people in uniforms or government people and a skiff, but the whole 60 people or something. And it's generally things I've talked about publicly, but they want me to come and give an organized presentation to Uncle Sam. I do when I leave, and that's kind of been my relationship. A little bit of stuff overseas, but nothing spying related. But because of that, I got pulled into this stuff in 2015, 2016, and it was actually absolutely a slow coup. And I figured that out by November of 2015. That's what they were doing, that they were setting up the Republican Party, and I was being used to do that. And then they had me bribe Hillary Clinton, and I've probably told you that story,
you did.
Facilitating an $18 million bribe. And so this movie was done something like the movie Fog of War with Robert McNamara, where he's narrated, and then you're being shown historical clips. But in this case, you're being shown historical clips and reenacted scenes. There's a young, handsome guy who plays me. There's a beautiful young woman who plays Maria, but Maria's still a beautiful young woman. And these scenes are dramatized word for word with word for word accuracy in almost all cases. So if you really want to understand what happened, General Flynn sees this as like this kind of crux historical tale. This isn't a theory. There's a coup that's been attempted, a Bolshevik revolution that really started around Thanksgiving 2015. I was part of it. Mm-hmm. I was part of it and getting ground up in it when I went to Congress and started explaining to them what was going on. It was a big drama. But I've known the secrets, and the secrets are all out in this movie. So it's pretty revealing.
So Patrick, when people get done watching the series, and folks, you can go online, enemywithindocuseries.com. When folks get done watching the docuseries, what are the top couple things they're going to come away with going, holy camole?
Well, there's wonderful comments. There's hundreds of comments, and already it's been seen 100,000 plus times, and 150,000, I think. And that's just on one channel, Rumble. You can also, if you can't remember the name, remember patrickbyrnemovie.com, and that will take you to the Enemy Within Docuseries. And it's showing now on Rumble. We expect it to be up any day now on some of the other major sites. And what people say after seeing is it puts all the pieces together. It adds some new pieces, and it fits everything together. The last 10 years or 12 years have seemed like something corrupt was going on. Mm-hmm. And they saw the different pieces, but it wasn't all put together. Well,
it puts it together.
Oddly enough, my story weaves through all this corruption, frankly. But what you discover in the movie is I was sent to do this. Mm-hmm. And who sent me to do this? You'll have to watch the movie to find out. But that's the only reason I haven't gotten prosecuted so far. I was sent to get to the heart of the corruption in the U.S. government in 2006. And there's a letter that documents this very strange fact. So it's all described in the movie. And the movie is really quite accurate. And at the end of the movie, this Russian woman, Maria Butina, gets on, and it tells the true story of Maria Butina, which is that she was, there's groups like the Spice Girls that are called producer driven. Spice Girls wasn't like four young women got together and became friends, became this band. It's like a producer had an idea, scripted it out, hired someone to write the songs, and then he hired four actresses. It's a story that's producer driven. The Spice Girls group, as they would say, producer driven. Well, the whole Russia scandal was producer driven. Maria Butina, this whole thing was all producer driven. It was all, they had written the script and then they nudged events to match their script so they can say, look at what we discovered. They're so crooked. And they used it. It's all been in this, in this slow coup to discredit Trump, to say he's a Russian asset and so on and so forth. Our guys made deals with Russia. I think our guys made deals with the Russian FSB about this stuff.
And Pat, you mentioned that when the Durham report was presented, they talked about on November 18th, 2020, after the November 3rd fraudulent event of 2020, they said, General Flynn, Sidney Powell, and somebody else, Patrick Byrne, ended up in the Oval Office. But Pat, I want to go a little bit back before that, because prior to the November election, and you and I spoke about this in the past, but it bears repeating, you had noticed there were problems in prior elections and actually had assembled a team and actually had arranged a meeting with the folks at CISA that supposedly is overseeing these elections. And you and a team showed up in Washington to educate them on what you found. They said they were going to meet with you, and they kept you guys in a room and never showed up. Am I remembering that correctly?
You're very close to the truth. I was sent. It wasn't my team, but I was asked to go and learn about an anti-human trafficking operation occurring in joint public-private in Texas. Uh-huh. And when I went there were some people, and I got to know the people there. One of the people, and so that's the real mission, was counter human trafficking, but there was a cyber group within it, and a couple of the cyber guys, as a hobby, were interested in the subject of election fraud. But we were talking about it in the context of Ghana, of Nigeria, of Iraq in 2008, of Ukraine in 2014. that there's been of the Philippines in 2010 and 2016, there have been these scandals, and the scandals have certain common denominators. For example, they find some reason that counting has to stop in the middle of the night. In the Ukraine, it was because, we got a Russian cyber attack going on. In the Philippines, it was, a piece of software needs to be updated. We need to, anyway, they always find some reason to do that. And that's the first sign of a rigged election, is that they stop the counting. That's why when we teach election theory, and we have a USAID group in the State Department that does this around the world, we teach the first principles first principle is an election without transparency has zero credibility. And then of the good practices, ID, day off, holiday, and in particular, the votes are counted where they're cast. And once you start counting, you count until they're done. There's no such thing as an interrupting counting. And these are like the basic principles we teach the world. In fact, there's a guy that I've come to know named Tim Meisberger, who he worked for 30 years in the State Department, and 23 of them abroad, teaching places like Burma and Bangladesh how to have elections. And there were these very basic principles that we operate by, which also that we teach the whole world. And there's 150 countries in the world that have elections, and 149 of them follow these rules more or less. One skips them all, and that's us. Imagine that. And what's nice is Tim worked in that division for years. He just got appointed to Trump. That division, the group who do election assistance, is a piece of the USAID. The State Department USAID has a group that does humanitarian assistance. He was fired because on January 6, 2021, I don't think he was there, but he wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post the next day or the day after that referred to the demonstration as mostly peaceful. Well, you and I get that's a tweak of the time, of what was going on in the time, and what was going on the summer before. So he was saying it was mostly peaceful. He got fired for that. So he was part of the America Project on and off for the last 4 years. Wonderful fellow, and great expertise. And he all over the world taught this very simple system that we have to fall back to, is my theory. He just got reinstated, but many levels higher than he was when he left 4 years ago.
Which is great.
It's fantastic. He's a wonderful public servant.
But when you tried to alert CISA, and the guy who was running at the time, Krebs, of what was going on, we'll meet with you. But they didn't show up, did they, at that meeting?
I was not part of that team. The person whose team that was called that a sub-team or related team. Yeah. That was led by Phil Walden.
Yeah.
He had one successful local meeting, and then they arranged the
Washington
meeting, which got yanked at the last minute. And that did look funny to us, but he was just a member. I don't like to think of it as my team. I was with a network of people.
Right.
Helping. I was trying to assist and fund this whole network.
So then the election, November 3rd, 2020 happens. CISA comes out pretty soon after that and said it's the most fair and honest election, right? You remember that goat rodeo. Yeah. And then they ended up changing their opinion later. But on December 18th, 2020, you, Sidney, and General Flynn got into the Oval Office to speak with President Trump. And you and I did a specific video on that went viral, right? But but it bears coming back to that, because this is critical, because, and again, tell me if I'm off, the opposition you faced at that meeting was not from President Trump saying, "Oh, come on, what are you guys talking about?" Was actually, well, really, what do you got? It was from people who were supposed to be giving him sound advice legally and politically. Cipollone, his attorney, I think Hirschman was there, if I remember correctly. So, and Lyons, I think, was a third cat there. And then, wasn't Mark Meadows there too? His chief of staff, who was blowing smoke up you guys?
Mark Meadows and Rudy were on the phone. They were at dinner together, and they were on a cell phone at a quiet table in an Italian restaurant Rudy goes to. And they were connected to, the president was at the Resolute desk. On his left side, there was a speakerphone. Yeah. I didn't even realize that they were on the phone.
Oh.
I didn't even realize that they were on the phone, because the room got set up once he saw me And well, this is all acted out in the movie. It's all acted out.
Yeah.
But honestly, you got to see the movie. The movie has it's all acted out for history. So and General Flynn plays himself.
Right.
General Flynn plays himself in that Oval Office scene, and his word for word what was said. It was so frustrating.
And is it inaccurate to say that meeting opened President Trump's eyes as far as what occurred? No.
We didn't go into the hard evidence like that. In fact, he turns out to have other people advising him, but we brought him an argument that no one else had thought of, or no one else had advised him of, anyway. And that argument was Barack Obama signed an executive order, and you, sir, signed a updated executive order that says if there's an election and there's adequate signs of foreign penetration or disruption of the election, the president has the authority to do anything he wants, from ordering a quickie investigation to a thorough presidential commission to he can order the election run again. He has full, and Barack Obama signed that. And so we've got, as well as yourself, sir. So you see that? Okay, now that you've seen that, sir, here are 5 different statements that the United States government have put out in the last 3 months. In October 20, so this is the argument we made. In October 23rd, the DHS and FBI put out a report saying that our election systems were the primary target of foreign actors, of Iranian persistent threat actors. On November 3rd, they put out an updated report that said the Iranians have successfully penetrated one of our 50 states. They're going after others, and other hostile nation states are joining in the attack. Okay, well, that's a pretty strong statement. Then December 6th, they came out and said the U.S. is suffering the greatest cyber hack in history. December 13th, they came out and explained the SolarWinds hack, that of 500 Fortune 500 companies, 425 had been hacked because they used the SolarWinds product, as well as the CIA, DOD, NSA, Treasury, blah, blah, blah. Everything had been hacked. DHS, everything had been hacked. So we say, based on, sir, Mr. President, based on the authorities that you and Barack Obama both agreed to here, that if there was a foreign attack, adequate evidence that the president gets to do what you want, this whole range, first, do we get over that? And we assert that this set of statements from the government itself over the last 3 months trigger that power. So this doesn't depend on any theories of vote flipping from space and South Korean jets or any of these different rumor stuff that all, or Italy or Germany. This depended on just statements from Uncle Sam himself in the last 3 months. And he was quite astounded. And if you agree that it does, then we'd like to present a range. We're suggesting that of the range of options, you go with the lightest footprint option. And that is a quick investigation. So, I mean, this is all acted out. I'm not going to act out for you. See the rest of it. You see the movie. But you'll see that there was nothing tyrannical. It was quite benign. He wasn't aggressive enough, in my view. He won't make that mistake again.
Well, so you and I spoke, I believe, on December 21st. And you were still at the Trump Hotel next, near the White House campus when you and I did our interview. And at the time, when it was my understanding, when the three of you, when you ended up leaving the White House, and there was a confrontation in there with his attorneys, which in the movie folks can see, but the thought, as I understood it, was Sidney was going to have a potential office on the White House grounds,
special counsel,
right, and be able to pursue that, but then. That never happened. And Mark Meadows essentially was running interference. No? Am I wrong?
Well, it turns out what happened was, as I wrote in my book, and I only learned this a year later when I saw Rudy Giuliani again. Rudy said, we would spend 4 hours together because they came in from their dinner and came and met us in the Yellow Oval in the residence. And we had another 2-hour meeting. And President Trump was shocked and angry at them, he said, well, why didn't you point out any of this? Why didn't you point out any of this to me, to his 3 lawyers? And literally the guy had the nerve to say, sir, we're we're not your campaign lawyers. We're your White House lawyers.
Okay.
I don't even know where to begin.
Well, where do you? Yeah, how do you dissect that out?
That's a guy who doesn't want to do his job.
Yeah, or a guy who's playing on the other team. But okay.
Yeah. Well, they were all getting promised big jobs.
Yeah.
Promised.
And that's all. And it's interesting. On the day this happened, when you, General Flynn, and Sidney got into the Oval Office on December 18th, that was supposed to be a landmark day because the then Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, was to issue a report on that same day about election interference. He delayed that report until what day? January 7th. The January 7th. And in that report, tell me if I'm off, said there was evidence of China interfering in the election. Am I wrong on that?
He says in his cover letter to the report, he says, these agencies have come to the professional conclusion that China was not involved, but I think that they're twisting the data. I think that there's adequate evidence that China was involved, blah, blah, blah. He says that in his cover letter. The professionals reported something else, but later whistleblowers came forward and said they were absolutely forced. No one was allowed to raise a dissident opinion to that. They were forced to go along with saying that. And anyway, that's what really happened.
So, Pat, when we go into never forget mode about what occurred on November 3rd, 2020, if I list some people's names, would you be so bold to tell me if you believe that they could be considered the enemy within as it relates to the fraud that occurred on November 3rd, 2020?
Sure.
Barack Obama.
Yes.
Joe Biden.
Yes. And asterisk, who knows what he's actually mentally down. He knew that he was taking part in the biggest voter fraud, election fraud act in history. He let that slip. But I don't think he could have given him any of the details.
John Brennan.
Yes.
James Clapper.
I don't have direct experience with Clapper beyond what's in the press, but it sure looks like he's part of it.
Susan Rice.
Yes.
Susan Rice, yes.
She's Obama's wrench, and I hear she's very smart. I actually, by odd coincidence, I met her when we were both students. I was at Cambridge, she was at Oxford. We met in a dining hall at Oxford once. I'm a few years older than she, maybe more than a few, because I'd been sick for a few years after college with cancer, and then I came back when I was like 27. I went back and got a master's degree and was maybe 25. Anyway, I think she was a few years younger. She was a Rhodes Scholar. I was at Marshall. I was at Cambridge. She's very bright and she's very hardworking. I think that she has served as Barack Obama's instrument. If Biden was a puppet and Obama was the puppeteer, Susan Rice are the cables. She's the strings. And she was meeting every day over at Barack Obama's house and driving 8 blocks and going into the White House. And I think her title was domestic policy advisor, but she was the hand in the Joe Biden puppet until there was a falling out. My understanding is there was a falling out. Biden did not agree to leave. And in April of last year, there was reported to be a falling out on a Saturday in the Oval Office, the two screaming at each other or yelling at each other. And then, who knows? I mean, they said that about me in the White House, and we weren't yelling. One of their guys was yelling. So there were definitely Barack Obama. Susan Rice is a key part, but they're just puppets to somebody else. They're puppets to the same WEF Davos world, and that's all true. That all sounded crazy to me 5 years ago too. I thought that there was a few bad players in our government, or more bad players. There was a whole class of bad players in our government, and I think there's like close to 24 actual Venezuelan spies.
And some other enemies within, as it relates to that event in November 3rd of 2020. James Comey.
Absolutely.
Christopher Wray.
Christopher Wray is more like a company man who was brought in to fix a mess. But he's a non-confrontational company man. He's a non-confrontational company man. And I think he came to a fork in the road where he had to decide, Do I expose this and shatter the FBI? Do I cover it up? And he went along with trying to cover everything up. And I know that from personal experience.
Gina Haspel, who was the director of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Well, I always heard good things about her. However, I also heard that she was in charge of, that she was over in London and running the program of spying on Trump and had to be aware of it and was part of all this. There's a whole class of people. Pompeo says that the top floor of the CIA has nobody that is pro-Constitution. I don't think that's true, but I think that's an overstatement, but it's directionally correct. I think there's a lot there that don't, and then there's some who really care about the Constitution.
Mark Milley.
Oh, part of the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, part. Well, I mean, just openly, think of how crazy it was 4 years ago, where you could have a chairman of the Joint Chief saying publicly, yeah, I was collaborating with the other side in case whatnot.
Yeah, I promised to give the Chinese a heads up if something was coming their way. To me, that's the definition of treason.
Yeah.
So here's the concern, Pat. There's ample evidence to show the enemies within are in fact the enemies still there, or kind of still circling. Many people say we should only look forward. We should not look back.
It'll happen 4 years from now if that happens.
Sure will.
The quid pro quo is this is the end of the progressive movement. There's a wonderful book by Richard Epstein, How Progressives Rewrote the Constitution. 90 years ago, progressives broke the Constitution and rewrote it under FDR. There's been about a dozen key cases that have just horrendously changed constitutional law. We've now rolled a few back, but I think every judge that was involved in covering this up and looked at it and said, this thing we've heard parroted endlessly, but 60 judges looked at this and they said there was nothing to it. Well, first of all, the answer is there were 93 and 32 of them went to trial. 61 got dismissed for standing or mood or this or that. 32 went to trial. Of those, 24, or 75%, went for Trump or the Republican side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And people are completely unaware of that, Pat.
Yeah. But so it's not but it's not relevant anyway. It's not relevant anyway. It's not true. The number's 93, and those that tried, there were overwhelmingly Republican victories. So it's not true, but that's not the point. The real point is nobody looked at this. Nobody looked at this in any depth. This is buried. We know now exactly how it works. They have 15 different ways of cheating.
Yep.
14 of them, I mean, they're very scientific. I know these people now. It's kind of funny. 14 of them are on the grounds, the different kinds of ways we've imagined. But at the end of the day, they go back and they have an office in Serbia. And that office in Serbia can come into the back of these machines in a way that doesn't leave a trace, especially if they're able to scrub the logs, which they do. But we still have found in many counties around America proof that somebody came in from overseas. And once they're coming from Canada or Mexico, you don't know where they're really coming from. They could be hopping from anywhere in the world. So you don't know anything. That's just the first hop. Well, it turns out they're coming in from Serbia. They create in the RAM of the county election management system a virtual machine. You probably know what a virtual machine is. Mm-hmm. Do you want me to explain, or you want to explain it to your group?
No, go ahead.
Well, you can create, about 20 years ago, it seemed to me this evolved, you could create in a computer, in its RAM, there's the hard drive, but then there's the RAM, which is the chips that there's no moving pieces, it's just electrons. And you're creating in that simulating a machine in there as if it's got its own servers and its own hard drive and everything like that, input-output devices. You're simulating that purely in RAM. They come in and they create a new computer purely in RAM within that county election system. They then go on and change the results to be anything they want them to be. And then they withdraw, that virtual machine disappears. Poof, it's just in the RAM. It never touches the hard drive, or it touches the hard drive so minimally.
It's not.
To find it, you have to do a forensic examination of the hard drive. And if you do, you will discover and that's what they found, for example, in Mesa County, Tina Peters. What they found was the remnants of that the database was over here and it said this, and then it moved over here and it said this other thing. But where it came from, they couldn't figure out. Was it internal script? No, it was. And it leaves no trace because it's just basically just in the RAM. So we know just what they do, and they've been doing it. I mean, it would knock your socks off to hear how much this has been going on for 20 years in 72 nations.
So then the question is, Pat, we just had an election in November of 2024. Did they try this again and fail?
Oh. Well, I know the answer to that.
I know. Yeah, I know you do.
I know. Oh, yeah, they definitely tried it again.
Yeah.
They tried it again, and they were thwarted. But who thwarted them and how that came about is a subject for someone else to talk about someday. But they were thwarted. No, they definitely tried it again. Well, they were first thwarted by all the great work that like the Steve Bannons and the Seth Keshels and people do, and the fellow, who's that wonderful guy, the Persistence from Pennsylvania, Scott
Pressler.
Or Scott Pressler.
Yeah.
All that's necessary. You need to get out the vote.
Yep.
If there's going to be mail-ins, I don't know. Some people say that the mail-in net hurts us, but we got through it anyway. I don't know. Now that Trump's in, he can fix it. But the truth is, there should be no mail-ins. All that, it should be the past. We should run our elections like the other 150, 149 civilized countries or uncivilized countries do, and follow some basic rules. Like a national holiday, but you vote in person,
right,
unless you're sick or something, and you have a special reason. You vote in person, a pot of blue ink, and there's a method of counting the ballots right there called Echo 65. And that's this very transparent process. So everybody in the village or the precinct, there's no question. It's all so transparent. And it's no tech, it's low tech, it's pen and paper and chalk. So that's what we have to go to. And I would advise we actually use the National Guard and high school seniors.
Oh, interesting.
For one election cycle, we're going to do this. Because we're going to find out we have a totally different we have the legislators than we think we have. I think that we have about 15%. I think about 15% of the Democratic votes are fake. And what happened in 2020 was like 35% or something. But I think that they really have an industry of generating fake votes. Pardon me, the Republicans never could at scale because the media would tear them apart, but the media gives a pass to the Democrats.
And Pat, I have been roundly criticized for years by my saying that during the Trump 1.0 administration, he was ill-served by the majority of people around him, including even some of his own family members, might I add, that I've gotten a lot of heat for saying that. In Trump 2.0, do we have the same problem?
I think when you put them all together, they're a net asset to him.
This time,
I think they've gotten to be sharp. I think for example, I hear he's relying on Melania more now. That's
a good thing.
That's good instinct.
That's good. So Pat, let's say President Trump calls you up today. He says, Pat, you, General Flynn, Sidney, you guys came in and gave me really sage advice on December 18, 2020, while those other three barking chihuahuas were kind of acting crazy in the Oval Office. So Pat, we're gonna go. We're gonna do the never forget, okay? But we're also gonna do the onward and upward that this goofball in Michigan has been talking about. This Janda character. Well, onward and upward, Pat. Give me your insight of where we need to go onward and upward as far as moving the ball down the field.
Well, I think getting rid of the Bolsheviks in our system does two things at once. It does I think they should just get a taste of their own medicine.
Yeah,
I agree. They should lose their bar licenses. Those who were really part of this should lose their bar licenses. Yep. Things like that. They committed treason. That's everything that they brought, just give them a taste of that. Everybody was part of this, but I would also, the 240 federal judges, Biden just, rammed through in one term with, I would think that in general, I would be very suspicious of who they are. I think there ought to be attempts to, well, at the very least, everything's got to be fixed. So in 2026, we get a real test. I think we're so much more Republican a nation than we think we are. Republican or Libertarian, which is fine by me.
Fine by me as well. Pat, currently your biggest fear looking forward?
Civil disorder brought by, there's probably out of the 20 million people who came, I would imagine there's about 1 million who are here with mischief on their minds. 20. There's organized groups, as we all know, from certain Latin American countries that they're here and they're trained on how to wreak mass mayhem.
And finally, last topic I want to delve into.
You can't protect your electrical grid everywhere.
No.
But what we have now that we did not have before is we always need to have mutual assured destruction. If Venezuela or Cuba had had its minions here start doing that, or if China did, we need a president who's going to say, we will commit the same thing. We can knock out all their power stations too, and we can nuke them if we have to too. So we have to be able to say, we'll retaliate against your country if your people bring that stuff into our shores. But and we'll conduct acts of war against you. That's it. When we had Biden, we didn't even have a president who would do that. It was probably his orders to get to that point and then let's not retaliate and let them collapse our society. But the fact that we can now retaliate and have a president who would retaliate totally changes the game theory here, because now if the Venezuelans cut loose here, the one last thing Trump is going to do is nuke Caracas. We would never go down without retaliating against Venezuela or Cuba or China if their people started bringing mayhem here.
And last topic, Pat. We've seen this surge as it relates to AI. A week and a half ago, we saw a presentation in the Roosevelt Room next to the Oval Office where you were on December 18th, 2020. With the SoftBank chairman, President Trump, Larry Edelson, and Sam Altman, the AI guy, and talking about Stargate and $500 billion. And then a couple days ago, we heard about, here comes China with DeepSeek.
It's 50 times more powerful, they say. In certain...
So what's your take?
It's free.
DeepSeek versus Stargate, because supposedly they did this on not antiquated hardware, but not the state-of-the-art hardware. They did it for a fraction of the cost, $5 to $6 million. It's 97% more, supposedly uses 97% less horsepower. What's your take on this, Pat? Because the question is this an equivalent of a Sputnik moment with this DeepSeek?
Well, it is a Sputnik moment, and it's a very clever piece of engineering. I read a paper on it last night. It's very clever what they did. It's exceptionally clever. They just thought of a new and more efficient way of doing things, cutting out a lot of wasted work, which frees up, makes it 50 times more powerful, the engine that much more powerful. It finds ways. Anyway, it's almost like when a video game is modeling reality, as you're walking through reality, it's keeping track of where you're looking, and it's only really simulating in great detail that part of the world. There's no reason for it to be simulating what's ever going on 8 feet behind you, because you're not looking that way. If you turn and start looking that way, it will. If your character does, then it starts creating that. It did the AI equivalent of that. It took areas that were not so valuable you couldn't just lose them, and it really, anyway, it's very clever engineering.
And a significant component of this new DeepSeek out of China is that it is open source.
Yeah.
Right? And actually, and maybe I'm off on this, but I've always thought you as kind of an open source guy.
Right.
Right? A big proponent of that, and it's actually pissed off a lot of people in the IT world that Pat Byrne has been has really pushed open source platforms. Am I off on that assessment?
No, we loved open source.
Yeah.
We loved open source. We had an open source search engine that was just, it's like open source. There'd be search engineers at Google, at Bing, at places like that. When you're in a corporation, you have to make accommodations. You've got to make compromises. but they would cooperate at nighttime and on this what the heck name was that? It was a great open source search engine that started becoming as good as Google's and Bing's, and then better, and started having these features that they didn't even have inside their own. It became so powerful. Anyway, that those open source projects can actually become the most leading edge projects because it really has the love of the people involved with no compromises.
And that's what we have here, really, don't we?
Yeah.
Right. So is it an overstatement to say that Deep Sixes, OpenAI, Stargate, you name it?
Well, not Stargate necessarily. I mean, this is a great innovation, but they've done something clever, but there's other people who have other clever things to do. But it does show that we're probably doing something wrong. And maybe what we're doing wrong is the distortion effects of the government stepping in. Because what all they've done so far is they will have funded who's ever politically connected.
Yeah, right.
Into their AI, one world order system. AI is so woke. Most AI is so woke. It's terrible.
Right.
And it's crazy. It's so they has special ideological programming within it. Anyway, there are versions of it that could be done that would not have that, and this sounds like that's another attraction. It's not mind control.
Right. So, last question, Pat. Many people in the freedom movement are concerned about the closeness of Elon Musk to President Trump. Does that concern you, or do you see that as a benefit?
I think that's a benefit. I think for him to have that great a brain with him, helping him through, and in particular, Trump has some very strong people around him, and boy, I really like a lot of his choices. But some of them, anyway, I think having Elon's advice will keep him from getting played.
Yeah.
He really, once he got rid of Mike last time, Mike Flynn.
Yeah.
Please, Mike Pence. Once he did that, his term, he got played by everybody around him. It was terrible. He was waiting, like he complained to me, and it's in the movie. He complained to me about how it was like, what shit I've got to work with here. It's that this is what they've been like since the beginning. He saw how his own lawyers. He said to his lawyers, like, at least these guys are willing to fight for me. You're not.
Right.
Why didn't you bring me that argument? Why didn't you point that out to me? And I said, well, we're not your campaign lawyers. We're your White House lawyers.
No, yeah, right. That says it all. Patrick Byrne, The Enemy Within DocuSeries.com. Patrick Byrne, I'd like to thank you for everything you have done, are doing, and will do. You are a patriot extraordinaire that has incredible perseverance, dedication, and has truly sacrificed for the benefit of every American. And I thank you, Pat, for being Pat.
Thank you, Dave.
And I thank you, folks, for joining us. Until next time, Dave Janda signing off. Dream big and dare to fail. Thanks for your time today.